That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot, they lie, they do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda.
Why is this person on TV? Like, why is this person on TV? Okay, but it's cool. We've had Hunter Avallone on the stream today.
My name is Hunter Avallone. I am a...
I'm not on the stream today. Why did I say that? We've had Hunter on the stream, so yeah, so it'll be super cool to react to content of someone I met. But yeah, hopefully I don't have to be harsh. The Jewish question. I wonder if he titled it this as a way to appeal to some of his older, more like alt-right adjacent kind of viewers from before his change. And like maybe he was kind of hoping that they'll kind of click onto this and maybe he could change their minds. That's what I'm guessing. I have a feeling he's not pushing the Jewish question concept. But yeah, we'll see. Ooh, intense.
The Jewish question. Depending on what century you're in, that question can be asking many different things. According to our good friend Wikipedia, the Jewish question was a debate in 19th through 20th century European society that pertained to the appropriate status and treatment of Jews. Sounds yikesy, I know. The Jewish question phrase has been used by anti-Semites since the 1800s, and in more modern and contemporary forms, the Jewish question, or the JQ, refers to the neo-Nazi conspiracy theory that Jewish people have complete control over the media, banking, and politics, and are aiming for world domination, usually by trying to quietly replace the white man through immigration. This may sound bizarre, but more common anti-Semitic tropes, such as Jews being wealthy or powerful, play directly into the more nefarious conspiracy theory.
He is very right about this, and you know what it's interesting is obviously you see this much more overtly on the right, but I do think it happens on the left in more subversive ways, especially like the idea of treating Jews like just typical white people that are privileged, acting like Jews are white and privileged, I think really plays into that when it's obviously just completely untrue. Downplaying anti-Semitism, like anything like that, like trying to really kind of bring up Jews as being privileged very much phases into that. And obviously the like leftist critiques, there's always going to be leftist and right-wing anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not just something automatically for the right. Anti-Semitism is being unique as a form of racism that, like, you know, it has its versions. It gets in everywhere. It gets into every culture. It gets into everything. So it's interesting that he brought that up. And I'm glad that he put that on.
Although some aspects of this conspiracy can be subtle,
yeah, I can
other
make it
times
faster.
Not so much.
That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot, they lie, they do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda.
Why is this person on TV? Like, why is this person on TV? But yeah, I'm guessing that Hunter is going to dismantle argue with evidence why these concepts are not true. Also, one of the biggest problems with the concept of a Jewish question is it implies there's a Jewish solution, right? And of course, we all know what the solution to the Jewish question is. It was the Holocaust. That was the exact wording that the Nazis used. So so that's one of the reasons why that kind of language is so kind of problematic. Using terms like Jewish supremacy, that idea of Jewish supremacy, like also filters into that. So if you're being critical of Zionism or you're being critical of like Israel or, Israeli structures or anything like that, or preference, like of Jews within Israel, anything like that, that's totally fine. But try not to use the term Jewish supremacy because it also is the kind of language that they use in order to facilitate this Jewish question idea. It's a misconception that Jews believe that they're chosen, that chosen means that they're supreme, that they're better. And that's why all these Jews we're all working, subversively to ruin the non-Jewish person. And it's just not true whatsoever. It's, in fact, the opposite. I would actually say that Judaism is one of the religions that literally believes that everyone else is totally fine and everyone is great, and everyone else is totally equal to them. It's why they don't try to convert anyone. They don't try to convert everyone because if you're not following Judaism, if you're not Jewish, they think you're just as likely to go to heaven as anyone else. And there's actually different original Judaism actually didn't even take away the concept of there being other gods for other people as well. Yeah, it's a total misconception what chosen means. Chosen literally just means a specific, like chosen to make a specific covenant between between that God, like Yahweh God, and the Jewish people or the Israelites. That's all it means, and it's a specific covenant, has to do with circumcision and all of that stuff. And it doesn't mean that they're like chosen or better. It's just basically a deal.
Impeach Trump movement is a Jew coup.
So where exactly did this conspiracy come from? The idea that Jews are wealthy, greedy, or conniving bankers dates back centuries. In Germany during the 1300s, there existed a
History time!
Catholic prohibition of usury, which prevented Catholics from lending money and charging interest. Jews were not under the same restrictions, so they had a clear economic advantage. When the Reformation occurred in 1517, parts of German territory were divided between Catholics and Protestants. In the Protestant territory, they allowed for money lending from Protestants, so Jews in that region lost their economic advantage, and Protestants were able to compete. Once this occurred, anti-Semitism began to rise in those areas. A study looked at this and concluded, we interpret these findings as evidence that with the Reformation, Jews lost their comparative advantage in money lending. This exposed them to competition with a Christian majority and caused an increase in ethnic and religious hostility.
I actually disagree with this assessment. Initially, he was correct about the money lending and all of that kind of stuff. That's how the stereotype of Jews being bankers kind of started, right? But you have to understand that Jews were barred from most professions. So any profession they were legally allowed to do, they would take advantage of. So one of them was banking, right? And money lending and all that kind of stuff. But anti-Semitism basically was always really dark from the moment Christianity was kind of born, right? Because keep in mind, people who remained Jews after Christ were seen as people rejecting Christ. And so they were seen as the group that had betrayed Christ and helped kill Christ, right? And that's why, and we've talked about this, like about the history of anti-Semitism, how much it connects inherently to Christianity. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're a Christian, you're inherently an anti-Semite. Obviously, I feel like you can argue the exact opposite with like Christian doctrine, because obviously Jesus was Jewish, and, you know, Christianity pushes all these concepts of like love your neighbor and all that stuff. So but the specific form of Christianity that was very popular, especially in the early Middle Ages, or some people call it the Dark Ages. I don't call it the Dark Ages, but whatever. That's like, that kind of Christianity definitely was very, very anti-Semitic in its nature. And I don't know if I would say that like that increased it. The Reformation, I would say, increased anti-Semitism only because Martin Luther himself was the person who started the Reformation, the Christian Reformation, was anti-Semitic, like very anti-Semitic. And I don't mean like, when I say anti-Semitic, I'm not talking about like the typical anti-Semitism and stuff, but he was really anti-Semitic. He really hated Jews. You can read about it. There's wiki articles about it and all that.
The geography of anti-Semitism is related to the geography of economic interactions between the Jewish minority and the Christian majority, they stress. That's kind of where this trope originated from, but it wasn't until the early 20th century that the Jewish question became mainstream. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a publication that grew increasingly popular from 1905 onwards. According to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, although the exact
Yeah, he skipped a really, really important part. As we talked about, the term anti-Semitism literally is a creation of the early 19th century. The word in Europe was JUDENHASS, which means Jew hate, right? Which I think is a way better term. I would prefer to call anti-Semites Jew haters. I just think it's better. I think it's harsher and more descriptive, right? JUDENHASS, right? Like, it's just so much better. And also, you know, anti-Semites, the concept of a Semite, first of all, I don't think there's a lot of evidence that Semites as a whole are like a real concept. It's kind of like based in race realism, and it includes Arabs and all of this stuff. So it's a bit of a weird term to use for Jews, and it does mean Jewish hate. So I still use that because words are tools, and that's the best way to communicate Jewish hate in like a serious kind of fashion. But overall, I would hope that we move away from that, because the reason why we started to use the word anti-Semitism instead of Judenhass was because they thought Judenhass, Jewish hate, sounded too crude. It sounded too low class. It sounded too hateful. Like, they wanted something that was a little more upper class. They didn't want to be seen. This is the beginning of the Enlightenment, right? Like the end of the 18th century and stuff. They didn't want to be associated with that religious Christian style anti-Semitism of the quote unquote dark ages of the past. But they still wanted to hate Jews. So they wanted to make Jewish hate more palatable, more modern, more scientific. And that's when they gave the term anti-Semitism to make it look like that. Because anti-Semitism, it kind of looked like, no. It's not that we're basing this on Jesus or anything like that, or any kind of religious hate. It's just we hate the science of them. We don't like their skull sizes. We don't like their noses. We don't like, the blood and it was much more about the science of the race, of Semites, of Jews. And that's how the concept starts. And it's unfortunate because we're still using that terminology to this day. And it's kind of shitty. Yeah, no, that's really, that period is really when the concept of races start to really exist. While people obviously saw color, people are never colorblind, and they saw tendencies and they categorized people this specific arbitrary category of like race, of like, black people and white people and all that stuff. That was really created at the same time as the term anti-Semitism. But yeah, I wish you'd kind of touched on that a little bit about like how anti-Semitism started when it morphed from Christian anti-Semitism into more quote unquote scientific anti-Semitism. And that is what leads to things like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and all that European anti-Semitism that leads to the Holocaust.
Encyclopedia, although the exact origin of the protocols is unknown, its intent was to portray Jews as conspirators against the state. In 24 chapters, or protocols, allegedly minutes from meetings of Jewish leaders, the protocols described the secret plans of Jews to rule the world by manipulating the economy, controlling the media, and fostering religious conflict.
The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a lot of people think it's just like a book detailing conspiracy. That's not what it is. It's minutes of a meeting. It's like leaks of minutes. So that's why it was kind of, can you imagine, it's like a modern WikiLeaks or something, but like totally inaccurate, but everyone assumes it's accurate. These minutes have been leaked of this secret Jewish cabal, meeting and all of that stuff. It actually, a lot of people believed these minutes because they were like, oh, like this is so legit. People didn't imagine forgeries are really common. It's the same shit happens today with people faking screenshots and all of that kind of stuff. Like, it's been proven over and over again, even during that period, that it was total bullshit, that it was a forgery. There's tons of ways that even anti-Semitic historians proved that it was a forgery. A forgery. Yeah, it's also plagiarized from like a fictional book. Like, it's bullshit. It's like a total bullshit document, but a ton of people bought into it. And there's some people who still buy into it, right? From, leaders of certain countries, particularly Middle Eastern countries or Eastern European countries. I mean, Henry Ford totally bought into it. Walt Disney bought into it. A lot of people bought into this shit. Like, this was pretty mainstream. This was pretty mainstream to believe in this shit.
Anti-Semitic publication introduced the Jewish question, and it took an already long-held belief that Jews were conniving or greedy and gave it a story. This publication was then translated and spread throughout the world for the next 2 decades. Fascism often rears its ugly head in a time of severe economic hopelessness, and a core tenet of fascism is a common enemy. Time and time again, the protocols were used to give the people a common enemy to blame their economic issues on.
This is one of the reasons why I don't like any kind of rhetoric that blames one entire group of people. Even if there's more evidence pointing towards that being true, I just have an inherent bias towards it because it reminds me of that. And I just don't like the idea of just taking one group of people, whether it's political dissidents or wealthy people or poor people or Jewish people or gay people or trans people, right? And just hyper focusing on them and scapegoating them. I think that's very problematic. And it's one of the reasons why I push against doing it to Israel as well. Like, I am so fine. I criticize Israel all the time, and it deserves, God knows it deserves criticism for how it treats the Palestinians. But it's something that you always need to be aware of, right? Because Israel is the only Jewish state. It's like, are you scapegoating them? Are you putting them, you have to be more sensitive to that aspect. Like, are you being as fair with Israel as you are with other countries? Are you holding it to similar standards, etc. like that? It's important, and I have to also watch myself because I have a bias towards focusing on Israel because I'm Israeli. So at least I have a bigger excuse for it. A lot of people don't. So it's just something to always keep in mind. And this doesn't just apply to Jews, right? This applies to a lot of things. I think trans people are a great example that trans people have actually a history of being scapegoated in very similar ways to Jews. And it's one of the most common things that you're seeing now, where like both conservatives and so-called feminists are kind of banding together because they're scapegoating trans people as being predators. And are there trans people that are predators? For sure. There's every different type of person that's a predator. However, like the hyper focus on predators that are trans, instead of it being like, even though it's a statistically insignificant number, you know, it's sketchy. It's weird, right? Like when someone like Blair White is making is like these videos about trans predators, it's strange, right? And it makes you give you pause. And the same thing kind of gives me pause. And it's not that I disagree with those people being predators. They are. Like the people that she often brings up are usually really gross, awful people. But you have to be very careful of how much information, how much focus you give to it, because, you know, bias can really show in that exact way.
In 1917, Russia, those who were angry at the results of the Russian Revolution used the document to argue the revolution was a part of a Jewish plot to enslave the world, and pointed to the protocols as the blueprint of that plan.
Yeah.
The scheme of yoking the protocols to the Bolshevik Revolution not only led to the allegation of a Judeo-communist conspiracy, but promoted the forgery internationally. The protocols of the Elders of Zion played a significant role in forming Hitler's beliefs after he was introduced to the book in the 1920s. According to the ADL, the myth of the Jewish world conspiracy permeated Hitler's thinking, and he linked Germany's economic hardship during the 1920s to the secret plot. Meanwhile, Henry Ford played a large role in bringing the conspiracy to America as he began publishing articles.
It's crazy to me that people still buy Ford cars, or that, like, has Ford ever apologized for any of this kind of like association whatsoever? It's just weird, like now we get so upset at like the tiniest, most petty association, but you have someone like Henry Ford who literally propagated that false document and spread it around and literally like facilitated anti-Semitism in the United States. Like he was like a leader in it. I don't know, like it's just chill. Like we're just over it. It's a little weird.
About the protocols in his newspaper, eventually publishing an American version titled The International Jew. This was translated into 16 different languages, over 500.
The International Jew. Now that goes towards this other anti-Semitic stereotype that goes along with that entire conspiracy. The idea that Jews are dual loyalists, or their loyalty, and once Israel gets created, that their loyalty is always going to be number one to Israel. So they can't be trusted in things like the military. They can't be trusted in, say, I don't know, like a Palestinian rights group or something like that. There have been tendencies for things like that to happen. You must be loyal, number one, to Israel.
1,000 copies were circulated around the country, and Ford himself.
Like I've gone to Palestinian rights organizations, like most of them have been great, right? But there was one that was on campus. It was run by students, which is probably why it was a lot less professional. But when they found out that I was Jewish, they started they started interrogating me to see if my opinions were quote unquote good enough to be like in their group. It wasn't good enough that I cared about Palestinians, that I wanted to help Palestinians. That wasn't enough. I needed to hate Israel enough. I need to demonstrate that my loyalty was not to Israel. And that, to me, and I wrote an article after that experience saying that this was an anti-Semitic experience, right? And people are like, oh, like they were talking about Israel. They weren't talking about Jewish, but I was like, but I was the only Jewish person in the room. And I was the only person that was asked those questions. It's the same thing that like, if you're asking like a black person, like to empty their pockets and prove that they haven't stolen from like a store or something, it's racist. And that was just a really gross experience. And that kind of stuff is still common in any kind of zone, whether you're talking about like, you know, the Jewish conspiracy or Israel or anything like that.
Was praised by Adolf Hitler for his contribution to furthering the Jewish question conspiracy. Although the damage had...
Yeah, and that's why prove you're one of the good ones. Yeah, and they never say it like that, but you know that that's what they're doing. And it's actually how I got the title of this stream was I want to be a good Jewish girl, right? It's because I actually have an inherent desire to want to be one of the quote good ones. I think a lot of people do. When you're a minority and you've seen how minorities get treated, of course you want to be seen as that. Jews who, like in the Holocaust, Jews who helped push other Jews into gas chambers. Now, I'm actually going to be doing a whole segment. I'm planning a whole stream on Jewish anti-Semitism because that's a whole thing. And there is a trend in general of an oppressed minority where there's always going to be certain people, members of that oppressed minority, where instead of trying to band together and fight the real enemy, right, which is prejudice and hate, they instead just want to be on the top of the pile. So there were Jews who pushed other Jews into gas chambers and stuff just for the extra chance of potentially being able to have a higher chance of surviving themselves. So there is, you know, there's a problem like that, and I think all minorities have a tendency to do that. I feel like my life would be a lot better if I like broke every anti-Semitic stereotype or anything that people assume that I was because I was Jewish, that I just automatically wasn't. And you have like, so you have like an urge to just, like, there's a bias towards doing that. I feel like I've had a bias towards like hating Israel, even in those cases where they don't deserve criticism, or shitting on Jewish communities or something. I think every person has that, because you know that it's going to make you seen as like one of those good ones, and it's going to make you more safe and all of that kind of stuff. But in reality, that kind of stuff it's a lie, and you don't want to fall victim to it. In the real world, I'm considered a huge critic of Israel, but online, people consider me like this like right-wing Zionist, which is crazy to me. Totally crazy to me. I mean, it's crazy to my dad. My dad would love to hear I was a right-wing Zionist. Okay, but it's not true. But just like the Overton window so fucked up like on Twitter and online and like in these kinds of spheres, that like there's this huge pressure to be super, super like, you know, put Israel in this category of evil, right? Not be critical, but put it in the category of evil. And if you are not putting in that category and you're not treating them like Nazis, right, then you're supporting the genocide of the Palestinians. And there's this huge pressure on, you know, lefty Jews and stuff to completely push that kind of narrative. Otherwise, you know, so we're seen as, you know, one of the good ones. And it's like, holy shit. It's interesting. There's another streamer. Her name's Maya. I forget her exact stream. But someone once asked her what her opinion was on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and her response was, "Ooh, this is great. I'm now going to get to tell you if I'm a good Jew or a bad Jew." And she meant it in the way that, like, sure, in Zionist circles, being a good Jew means being pro-Israel, but in anti-Zionist circles, being a good Jew means being anti-Israel. So it's just interesting how that kind of dichotomy gets formed on both sides, and it's very frustrating. Because, of course, the world and conflicts are very rarely black and white like that. Yeah, and then you have to condemn them because you're one of the bad ones. Yeah, I just feel like this inherent need as a Jewish person, and I probably did this in this entire conversation, to always be talking about how, no, don't. Trust me, I criticize Israel. I don't like Netanyahu. I hate what they're doing to the Palestinians. I always feel like this need to just mention that. And it's kind of toxic, right? Because I feel like those things should go without, like, I shouldn't even need to say those things for my opinions to be taken seriously, but it feels like I need to say that stuff just inherently. And that kind of, yeah, and that's a bit toxic, right? So I definitely I'm trying to work on myself for that. And I talked a bit about yesterday with how, like, the incentive structure is to focus so much on, you know, on being a Jewish person that just shits on other Jews no matter what, because it's profitable, because Jews are a minority. It's totally bizarre. And it's interesting, I was talking to Fanatic, who is a black streamer, and someone had assumed he's also a musician. And so when someone heard that he was a musician, someone automatically assumed that he was a rapper, right? Probably because he's black. And he's not a rapper. He's like a classical pianist. He's a really fantastic pianist. Someone should post his link in chat. He's an excellent streamer. And he said that one of the things that hurt him about that comment, right, is that he feels like a part of him purposely avoided things like hip hop and wanted to get into, like, you know, whether like classical music or like, you know, piano or something like that, to be seen as quote unquote one of the good ones. You know, because he'd kind of internalized some of those stereotypical aspects of what people expected of him, and he wanted to be different. And over time, he's moved away from that, and he's learned to love being black and love the culture and all those things associated with that. And that's why that comment kind of hurt him so much.
Had been done. In 1921, the London Times provided conclusive proof revealing the protocols of the Elders of Zion was partially plagiarized from a French satirist who didn't even mention Jews, with the remainder of the publication just being completely false.
Yeah,
the
so
Elders of Zion were not real.
Nice.
There was no secret meeting, and the entire purpose of the document was to incite hatred of Jews. If ever a piece of writing could produce mass hatred, it is this one. This book is about lies and slander. Despite this proof, and even continued investigations further revealing the document to be plagiarized and manipulated, Hitler continued to use the document to push forward his radical ideas. In 1927, Henry Ford rescinded his publication and apologized for spreading a lie. Yeah, I'm glad you apologized, but you already received a 5-star review from Hitler, bro. Once in power, Hitler invoked the protocols to justify anti-Semitic legislation and suppression of all opposition to the Third Reich. For example, the first anti-Semitic measure in April of 1933, a one-day boycott of Jewish stores, was deemed a defense against the Plan of Basel, another name for the protocols. Hitler continued to invoke the protocols in speeches, and it was even used in curriculum to educate children about the so-called Jewish conspiracy. All of this, however, paled in comparison to the Holocaust, the calculated extermination of millions of Jews Hitler deemed the final solution to the Jewish question. In 1935, a Swiss court fined 2 Nazis for circulating
my criticisms are very small in comparison.
The court ruled the document libelous and an obvious fraud. In 1936, Hugo Valadin, Swiss historian, described the protocols as the greatest forgery of our time. In 1964, the US Senate delivered a report ruling the document fabricated and gibberish. Every age and country has had its share of fabricated historic documents, which have been foisted on an unsuspecting public for some malign purpose. One of the most notorious and the most durable of these is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Although the document has been thoroughly debunked and discredited, it continues to circulate today worldwide. The JQ can be found on any internet forum, with various memes dog whistling at the Jewish conspiracy. Neo-Nazis and white supremacists in America continue to use the protocols to further anti-Semitism. It's not just in America. Across the world, the conspiracy continues to fester. In the early 2000s, Egypt came under intense scrutiny after the state-sponsored TV channels allowed for an anti-Semitic miniseries to air based in part on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In fact, the show was even re-aired in 2012. Many school textbooks throughout the Arab and Islamic world teach the protocols as fact. Countless political speeches, editorials, and even children's cartoons are derived from the protocol.
It's true. Hamas teaches it as well.
One particularly vile
and we've talked about where this. Do you guys remember? Please, who brought it to the Middle East? Oh, Willow Ridge, thank you so much for subscribing with Prime. Welcome to the Aristocracy. But yeah, like who brought it? It was the Soviets. The Soviets brought the Elders of Zion to the Arab world, because obviously Arab anti-Semitism was not as bad beforehand.
Attempt at furthering anti-Semitism was the Palestinian Hamas-affiliated kids show Pioneers of Tomorrow. This creepy show depicts a large mouse character talking about pledging allegiance to Islam and repeatedly sharing anti-Semitic tropes to children. In both season 2 and 3, the mouse character calls for all Jews to be killed. At one point, the kids show depicts the mouse killing an Israeli officer. Well, I guess what happens in the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse stays in the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. Thankfully, the show was canceled in 2009 and has been largely forgotten, but it still remains an example of how anti-Semitism can be spread through media to children.
Yep. It's one of the reasons why when people on Twitter try to say like, oh, like, this conflict it's not complicated whatsoever. It's very simple. There is an oppressor and an oppressed, right? Because of the power disparity. Dude, like, I agree there's a huge power disparity. I agree that Israel shares most of the responsibility. However, acting like most does not mean all. And acting like a complex situation isn't complicated just because it serves your narrative is just lying. It's just lying, because you end up erasing all those aspects, right? And acting like Hamas or Palestinians are not contributing at all to like any negative side of the conflict is not true, right? And that's just completely erasing a lot of real aspects of the conflict.
In 2016, Alex Jones called out the Jewish mafia, essentially repeating the JQ verbatim.
They're always trying to claim that if I talk about world government and corruption, I'm anti-Semitic. There's mafias of all different stripes and groups, but since you want to talk about it, the Emmanuels are Jewish mafia. So there you go. But I mean, it's not that Jews are bad. It's just they are the head of the Jewish mafia in the United States. They run Uber. They run the healthcare. They're going to scam you. They're going to hurt you.
You know, it's just funny. Like, the shit that you just said, it's fucking hilarious.
It's nothing more than validating conspiratorial nonsense to justify the feelings of those filled with hate.
But Hunter, isn't it true that Jews do have more wealth?
Despite the fact that today, more than half of American Jewish households earn less than $99,000 per year and 31% earn less than $49,000, it is true that Jews are the wealthiest religious group and hold a disproportionate amount of wealth. But this isn't because Jews have a genetic predisposition.
And he's only talking about the United States. Right? It's only in the United States where Jews are particularly, like, I guess, like, wealthier. And by wealthy, they usually mean, like, you know, middle class and very rarely lower class. And that's only in the United States. It's just not common. So when you're talking about the Jews from the rest of the world or Jews in Israel, yeah, total different population.
to overthrow their host nation, it's actually because of historical anti-Semitism. The Jews progressed because many areas were blocked to them. Many Irish were integrated into the police force, for example, and only few Jews. The Jews entered new fields in which there was need for people with initiative. They didn't integrate into traditional banking, so they established the investment banking. The Jews had to excel in order to survive, says Avia Spivak, a professor of economics and former Bank of Israel deputy governor. I once had a student of Russian descent who told me that his parents said to him, "You must be the best, because then you might get a small role." That was the situation of the Jews abroad and in America too until the 19th.
Exactly true. One of my black friends once said to me that he's a software programmer, incredibly successful guy. And he told me that his father always taught him that, like, son, this is a racist world. And if you want to be treated as equal to a white man, you need to work twice as hard. And it's one of the reasons why he worked so fucking hard to get that job and all of those things, right? And he's like one of the hardest workers I know. And Jewish culture is very, very similar because of that idea, right? It's this idea that, like, you never know when you're gonna, because we literally get kicked out of places all the time, even when things are going well. There's this thing that's just kind of like embedded in our culture of, like, you've gotta work really hard because you don't know when it's gonna be taken away. You don't know. And it was in the Holocaust, it was the wealthier Jews that survived. The poor Jews, and this is something we haven't gotten into, but it's one of the things that really frustrates me when we teach Holocaust history is the classism within the Holocaust. And there's the class structures within the Holocaust. It's very, very important. I mean, Marxists here, pay attention. Because as a whole, the majority of the Jews that died were not actually German Jews. They weren't French Jews. They were the Jews that were particularly much poorer, the Jews who were less integrated, the Jews who were living in poverty, in places like Poland or the Ukraine, etc., right? Or Czechoslovakia. So Polish Jews in particular got completely massacred. And it was the wealthier Jews that could escape. So wealth for Jews is associated, and in Jewish culture, is associated with survival. And not having wealth, right, is associated with death. It's very, very important when you're understanding kind of Jewish history and culture associated with that. But it's something that I wish we talked about with the Holocaust more, because there's just so many misconceptions, especially people think that because it was in Germany, that it was German Jews that died. And it's not true. Like, German Jews were financially a lot more successful than other Jews in Eastern Europe. And so they could escape. My grandmother's side escaped because of money. And my grandfather's side did not escape because he came from a very, very poor family in Romania. So it's like, money and class structure was still really, really important even within Jewish circles in the Holocaust.
1960s, the most prestigious universities didn't take in Jewish students, so they studied in colleges and got the best grades. When the discrimination disappeared, the Jews reached the top. It should go without saying that it's pretty damn lame to try and weaponize the fact that Jews are hard workers. This is a good thing, and it brings a net positive to society. All in all, this dangerous and fabricated Jewish question conspiracy theory has clear, real-life consequences. We all must be equipped with the knowledge of how this defamatory myth has spread so we can better combat one of the most damaging publications in the last 100 years. The Jewish question is a bunk conspiracy based on fabricated nonsense meant to validate the feelings of those filled with hate. Don't fall for it.
That was a good video. I'm actually really impressed by it. I don't think he really got into the details I was hoping for, but it's a short video, right? It's only 12 minutes.